Good morning, fourth graders. It's time for our next installment of Owls in the Family. And today I'm going to read to you chapters 5 and 6. So here we go, chapter 5. Though there were only a few more weeks left of school before the summer holidays began, each day seemed 100 years long. I could hear the river boiling over the sandbars as I sat at my desk, and I could smell the sticky sweet smell of the young poplar leaves. Our school stood right beside the river, and every now and then a flock of ducks would go over the playground, quack, quack, quacking, as if they were laughing at us for being stuck inside while they were flying free across the wide prairie. What made it even worse for me was just sitting there wondering what my owls were doing. After school, I would jump on my bike and pedal like 40 over the bridge and down our street. When I got close to home, I would give a couple of owl whoops to let Wall and Weeps know I was coming. By the time I skidded into the yard and parked my bike, they would be tramping impatiently up and down the cage. As soon as the door was open, they would come waddling out as fast as they could, ready for play. Wall liked to scramble up on the back of an old lawn chair. Then he would take a wild leap and try to land on my shoulder. If he missed, he would nosedive into the lawn. But it never bothered him much. He would hop back to the chair, climb up, and try again until finally he made my shoulder. Weeps was different. He never believed he could do anything by himself. And so he would just sit on the lawn and whimper until I picked him up and put him on my shoulder. I think Weeps' spirit must have been broken in the oil drum because as long as I knew him, he was always afraid of doing things. With both owls riding on my shoulders, I used to go down the street to where our gang played games in an empty lot. Can the Can was a favorite game that spring, sort of a combination of baseball and football. We used an inflated rubber beach ball that belonged to Murray, and when all the kids got chasing it, Wall would get so excited he would join in too. One time he got in the way of the ball just when somebody kicked it, and it knocked the wind clean out of him. The next time the ball came near him, he made a jump and got hold of it with both sets of claws. There was a hissing noise, and the ball went limp. Wall was pleased as punch, but we weren't because it was the only ball we had. All the kids except Bruce and Murray were a bit scared of the owls, so when I had them on my shoulders, I could go anywhere in Saskatoon and be safe as houses. Even the tough kids down by the flour mill kept their distance when I had the owls with me. Those owls were better bodyguards than tigers. Wall and Weeps grew fast. Weeps would eat anything he could get and still be hungry, but Wall was fussy about his food. At first, Wall would only eat cooked butcher's meat, hard-boiled eggs, and fig cookies. Later on, he would eat anything that came from our table, even vegetables, all except parsnips, which he hated. Occasionally, both owls would eat a dead gopher that some kid had shot or snared as a present for them. They didn't really like their supper raw. By the middle of June, when they were 3 months old, my new pets had reached full size. Wall was a little bigger than Weeps and stood about 2 feet high, but his wing spread was nearly 5 feet across. The claws of both were about 1 inch long and as sharp as needles, and their big hooked beaks looked strong enough to open a tin can. Weeps was a normal owl color, sort of a mottled brown, but Wall stayed almost pure white, with just a few black markings on his feathers. At night, he looked like a ghost. Although they were grown up now, neither of the owls seemed to know what his wings were for. Because they saw us walking around, they seemed to think they had to walk around too. Maybe if I had been able to fly, they would have learned to fly a lot sooner. But the way things were, both owls tried to do what we kids did. They saw us climbing trees, and so they took to climbing trees. It was pretty silly to watch Wall climbing, because he used to really climb. First, he'd jump up to a low branch. Then he'd use his beak and his claws to half lift himself and half shinny to the next branch. My pigeons used to circle around sometimes and watch him. They must have thought he was crazy. People sometimes thought so too. One day, Wall was climbing a poplar in our front yard when a man and a woman stopped on the sidewalk and watched him with their mouths open. Finally, the man said to me, "What on earth's the matter with that bird? Why doesn't he fly to the top of the tree?" "He can't fly, sir," I replied. "He never learned how." The man looked at me as if I were crazy too and walked off without another word. The day Wall actually learned to fly was one I'll remember for a long time. He had climbed a cottonwood in the backyard and got way out on a thin little branch, and he couldn't get back. You never saw an owl look so unhappy. He kept teetering up and down on the end of the branch and hooing at me to come and get him out of this fix. Dad and Mother came out to see what was going on, and they started to laugh because who ever heard of a bird that couldn't get itself down out of a tree? But when people laughed at Wall, it hurt his feelings and upset him. What with the laughter and the fact that it was supper time and he was hungry, Wall got careless. Finally, he teetered a little too far forward and lost his balance. "Hoo-hoo!" he shrieked as he bounced through the branches towards the ground. And then all of a sudden, he spread his wings, and the next thing any of us knew, he was flying. Well, sort of flying. Not having done it before, he didn't really know what he was doing even then. You could tell he was just as surprised as we were. He came swooshing out of the tree like a rocket, and he seemed to be heading straight for me. But I ducked, and he pulled up and went shooting back into the air again. He was still hoo-hooing like mad when he stalled and slid back downward, tail first, hit the ground with an awful thump. By that time, I was laughing so hard I had to lie on the grass and hold my stomach. When I looked up at last, it was to see Wall stomping into his cage. He was furious with all of us, and I couldn't persuade him to come out again until the next day. At supper that night, my father said, "You know, I don't believe that owl realizes that he's an owl. I believe he thinks he's a human being. You'll have to educate him, Billy." It wasn't quite as bad as that. Wall eventually did learn to fly pretty well, but he never seemed to like flying or to trust it. He still preferred to walk wherever he was going. Weeps never learned to fly at all. I tried to teach him how by throwing him off the garage roof, but he wouldn't try. He would just shut his eyes, give a hopeless kind of moan, and fall like a rock without even opening his wings. Weeps didn't believe he could fly, and that was that. Just before school ended, Wall learned a new trick which bothered me a lot. He discovered that if he took a good swipe at it with his claws, he could tear a hole in the chicken wire of the cage. And once he learned to do this, it was impossible to keep him penned up when he didn't want to be. This worried me because there were a lot of tough alley cats and tough dogs too in Saskatoon. And I was afraid if one of them ever got a hold of Weeps or Wall when I wasn't around, then that would be the end. Oh, there's my dog. Here, I'll let you look at my dog here. There's Annie at the front door, looking out at our neighbors. Whoops. Before she was just sitting and listening to the story. Who knows? Oh, well, while I'm stopped here they are in the cage, and there's Billy on the ground laughing so hard. This was after Wall learned to fly. And here's his mom and dad also laughing at the owl. After a look at the owl's claws and beaks, Mother said she thought it would be the end of any cat or dog that tackled Wall or Weeps, but I still worried. One night, Wall had a little argument with Mutt about a bone, and Wall got mad and wouldn't come down out of his tree to go to his cage at dusk. I called him, but he just ignored me, and finally I had to go off to bed and leave him out. I slept pretty lightly that night with one ear cocked for trouble because I knew the cats would be about. Sure enough, just at dawn, I heard a squawk and a scuffling noise outside. I hopped out of bed, grabbed my air gun, and whipped out of the house as fast as I could. Wall wasn't in the tree. In fact, there was no sign of him anywhere in the front yard. I raced around the corner to the back, expecting to find him dead and eaten. But instead, I found him asleep on the back porch steps. He had his feathers ruffled out the way birds do when they are asleep, and it wasn't until I got right up to him that I saw the cat. Wall was sitting on it, and only its head and tail stuck out beneath his feathers. But enough was showing so I could see that this cat wasn't going to bother anybody anymore. I pulled Wall off, and he grumbled a little bit because I think he'd found that cats make good foot warmers. It was a big ginger tomcat that lived 2 doors down the street and belonged to a big man who didn't like kids. This cat had been the terror of the birds, other cats, and even of the dogs in our neighborhood for years. I got a shovel and buried it at the bottom of the garden. I suppose the cat had thought Wall was some new kind of chicken. Well, he found out differently. Dogs were no problem to my owls either. Though Mutt was no owl lover himself, he wouldn't let any strange dog chase them, not without a fight. Several times he saved Weeps from a mauling. But he didn't need to look after Wall. There was a German shepherd who lived near us, and one day this dog met Wall out walking and decided to see how Horned Owl tasted. I heard the ruckus and came running. But by the time I got to the street, Wall was sitting on the dog's back, digging his claws in for all he was worth and ripping chunks out of the dog's ears with his beak. The shepherd headed down Spadina Avenue, yip, yip, yipping, till you could have heard it in Timbuktu. Wall rode him for 3 blocks. Might have ridden him right out of town if the dog hadn't dodged through a hole in a board fence and knocked Wall off. I had chased after them on my bike, but by the time I got to the fence, Wall had picked himself up, given himself a shake, and settled his feathers, and was his usual friendly self. He gave me a cheerful hoo-hoo and jumped up on the handlebars for a ride home. Word seemed to get around after that, and the neighborhood dogs took to crossing over to the other side of the road when they saw Wall coming. Chapter 6. On the day school closed for the summer, the T. Eaton department store announced it was going to sponsor a pet parade 2 weeks later, and there were going to be prizes for the most interesting pets and the best displays. Bruce was the first of our gang to hear about it, and he came right over to my house to tell Murray and me. "Hey," said Bruce, after he had told us all he knew, "with the animals we got, we could win 12 prizes. How about it?" Murray and I didn't need much convincing, so we spent the next couple of days planning what we'd do. First, we decided to hitch Mutt and Rex to my old express wagon. We would fix it up with colored cardboard and stuff so it looked like a circus wagon. We planned to put an old fur muff of my mother's around Mutt's neck to make him look like a lion, and we were going to paint black stripes on Rex so he would look like a zebra. And then we decided to build a circus cage on the wagon and fill it with different kinds of gophers. Finally, we decided to have the owls riding on top of the cage all dressed up in doll's clothes. We had 2 weeks to get things ready, and we really worked. First, we built the circus cage. And when we were finished, it looked just like the real ones that used to come to Saskatoon with the Bailey Brothers Circus every summer. Ours wasn't as strong, though, because the sides were only cardboard, painted red and blue and yellow. And instead of iron bars, we used chicken wire to keep the gophers from getting out. When it was finished, we made a hike out to the bluffs near the exhibition grounds, because that was a good place to find wood gophers. We got 6 of them, and on the way home, we snared about 12 striped gophers that were living in a cut bank by the roadside. Together with the 30 ordinary gophers we already had, well, this added up to an awful lot of gophers. And there wasn't going to be room for all of them in one circus cage. Murray fixed that. "Why don't we make another cage out of my wagon?" he suggested. "Then we'd have twice as much chance to win first prize." It was a dandy idea. So we went ahead and built the second cage. Then we decided to put some of our white rats with the extra gophers in the second one to make it different. The day before the parade, which was on a Saturday, we had everything ready. I had borrowed some doll clothes from Faith Honnigan, who lived on the next block. Murray had got some washable sign paint from his dad so he could paint the black stripes on Rex. We had found a set of real dog harness for Mutt, and we had made a second set for Rex out of twine. Cage wagons were all finished and stored away in our garage so they wouldn't get wet if it rained. On Sunday morning, I didn't even wait to eat my breakfast before I rushed out of the garage. Murray was already there, but Bruce didn't come along for about an hour, and we were getting worried he might not make it at all. By the time he showed up, we had the gophers and the white rats all loaded, and I was trying to get the dolls' clothes on the owls. Bruce came into the yard with a shoebox under his arm and a big grin on his face. "Hi," he shouted. "I guess we'll win the first prize, sure. Bet you can't guess what I have in this box." Murray and I couldn't guess. I shook the box a couple of times, and whatever was inside was pretty heavy. I was just going to untie the string and open it when Bruce grabbed it away from me. "No, sir," he said. "Don't you do that. We might never catch this critter again." "Oh, come on," I begged him. "What you got in there anyway?" "Come on, Brucey, you have to tell us." "Don't have to, don't aim to," Bruce said. "Just you wait and see." Murray and I pretended we didn't care what he had in his old shoebox anyway. I went back to putting the dolls' clothes on the owls, and it wasn't easy. Weeps just stood there and whimpered, while I pulled a pink dress over his head and pinned a floppy hat on him. But Wall took one look at the sailor suit I had for him, and then he rumpled himself up into a ball and began to clack his beak and hiss. It took two of us to hold him down while we got him dressed. By the time we were finished, he was in a terrible temper. We couldn't trust him to stay quietly on the wagon top after all that fuss, so we decided to tie him to it with some twine around his legs. That made him madder still. While Bruce and I were working on the owls, Murray was trying to paint the stripes on Rex. Rex didn't like it, and there was about as much black paint on Murray as was on the dog. And then Murray said he might as well finish what Rex had started, and so he put black paint all over his face. Just before we were ready to start for downtown, Bruce took the paint box and painted some words on the shoebox, and then he tied the box to the top of the second wagon. What he printed was, "Surprise pet, do not feed." And I don't know if you can see that or not, but he had a few problems with the little spelling there, I think. We harnessed up the dogs, with Mutt leading because he knew how to pull and harness and Rex didn't. Rex didn't seem to want to learn either. He kept pulling off to one side, and every time he did it, he almost upset the wagons. We had an awful time getting our outfit all the way to downtown, and we were nearly late for the parade, which started at 10 o'clock. One thing, though, by the time we did get there, old Rex was just about worn out, and he had stopped acting like a bucking bronco. The parade formed in front of the Carnegie Public Library, and then it was supposed to go about 6 blocks to the T. Eaton store where the judge's stand was. Seemed like a million kids were there with every kind of pet you ever saw. One little boy, about 5 years old, was leading a Clydesdale horse as big as an elephant, and the horse had "baby" on the blanket it was wearing. Well, if that thing was a baby, I hoped to eat it. There were lots of goats, and it was a hot day, and you could smell goats all over Saskatoon. Some of the girls were wheeling cats along in baby carriages, and the cats were wearing silly hats and were pinned down under lacy covers, and some of them were yowling fit to scare the dead. There were more dogs than you could shake a stick at. Every kind of dog you ever heard about, and a lot of kinds that nobody ever heard about. Right in the middle of the parade was a boy leading a pet skunk on a string. He had the middle of the parade all to himself, too. Nobody was crowding him. There were pet rabbits, ducks, chickens, geese, a couple of pigs, and a bunch of pedigreed calves. There was even one little boy carrying a quart jar full of water with a bunch of tadpoles swimming around in it. You'd expect lots of trouble, what with all the animals, and the fact that it was a hot day and everybody was excited, and there was so much noise. But there really wasn't much trouble. There were dog fights, of course. And one dog, who wasn't even in the parade at all, made a go for a cat in a baby carriage, and that stampeded one of the goats. But some salesmen from the store were in the parade too, and they got things quieted down, though one of them got bitten on the leg a little bit. It took about an hour for our outfit to get opposite the judges' stand. There were 5 judges, some women, some men. The mayor of Saskatoon was one of them. There were 2 Mounties beside the stand dressed in their red coats. A lot of parents were jammed up against the stand too, so they could cheer if their kids won a prize. I'd had a good look at the parade by then, and there wasn't an outfit that had a patch on ours. We were sure to win a good prize, and I figured it would be first prize. We had a little trouble, though, when we got to the stand because Rex was so tired that he just lay down and wouldn't get up again. But that only made the judges laugh, and they came down from the stand to take a good look at our entry. I overheard one of the women judges tell another woman that ours was the best rig she had seen. And isn't it cute the way it's decked out, just like a real circus? First prize seemed to be right in our pockets. When the president of the T. Eaton store, who was also one of the judges, saw the shoebox on top of the second wagon. "Hello," he said. "Now here's a good idea. Look at this, Sam. These boys have a special pet in reserve. Now that's what I call smart merchandising." Well, everyone crowded around to see what the special pet was, and Bruce, with a silly smile on his dopey face, untied the box and lifted up the lid. What was in the box was a rattlesnake. Well, I guess you can imagine what happened next. All the people shoving and pushing to get away from us got the animals so upset that they began to stampede too. The skunk got crowded into a storefront, and that scared him, and he did what skunks always do when they get scared. There were calves and goats going every which way, and the dogs all went crazy and started chasing anything that ran, and that was everything there was. Our 2 cages got upset and squashed, and all the gophers and white rats went skittering off under people's feet. Walt climbed up to the top of my head and kept beating his wings, so I couldn't see too much of what was happening, but I could still hear it. Women were screaming. One of the Mounties had hauled out his big revolver and was waving it in the air, while the other one never stopped blowing his silver whistle. All you could hear was yells and howls and barks and screams and yowls. I tell you, there never had been anything like it in Saskatoon for 100 years. We didn't stick around any longer than we could help. We saved the wagon, our 2 dogs, the owls, and that darn snake. Bruce grabbed the shoebox the moment the ruckus started and stuck to it like a burr until we got back to my place. "Gee," he said, as we were getting a drink from our garden hose, "if I'd lost that old snake, I'd have got my britches tanned from here to Mexico. Belongs to our hired man, and it's been his pet for 15 years, ever since he was a cowboy down in the Cypress Hills. It's so old it hasn't any teeth, nor any poison either, but he sure is fond of it just the same. Sleeps right with him in his bunk." I still think we should have won the prize. And that then brings us to chapter 7, which I'll do the next time. But I do have a poem for you today. I think some of you already know that my favorite team is the Cleveland Indians, and I know many of you are Reds fans. And I think I've read this to you before, but I am confident that we're going to get back to playing baseball one of these days. And so I'm going to read my favorite Casey at the Bat poem in honor of the baseball season, which I hope will get to begin pretty soon. Casey at the bat. It looked extremely rocky for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 2-4, but with an inning left to play. So when Cooney died at second and Burrows did the same, a pallor wreathed the features of the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go, leaving there the rest, with that hope that springs eternal within the human breast. For they thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that, they'd put even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, and likewise so did Blake, and the former was a puddin' and the latter was a fake. So on that stricken multitude a death-like silence sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey's getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single, to the wonderment of all, and the much-despised Blakey tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and they saw what had occurred, there was Blakey safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. Then from the gladdened multitude went up a joyous yell. It rumbled in the mountain tops, it rattled in the dell. It struck upon the hillside and rebounded on the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. Okay, so the score was 2-4, but now Mudville has two guys on base, and their home run hitter, Casey, is up to bat. So if he could just hit a home run, they'd win the game. Would they tie it? No, they would win it 5-4. So that's what they were hoping for. Okay. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then when the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance glanced in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches black with people there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on the stern and distant floor. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone on the stand. And it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He made the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said, Strike two. Fraud! Cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered, Fraud. But one scornful look from Casey and the audience was odd. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. And they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lips. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel vengeance his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball. And now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. Band is playing somewhere. And somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. I love that poem. All right, everyone. Well, have a good week. I hope you are enjoying the story, Owls in the Family, and I hope you enjoyed that poem. And I'll be back another time. Stay healthy. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.